Hey everybody, how are you? Welcome back to art class. So, why do we have art? Why do we take art class in school? That's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it. One of the reasons, and I think is the most important reason that we take art class, is because it's one of the few classes where we get to be creative. When humans are creative, it helps them develop problem-solving skills. If all I ever took was math, I would only learn how to follow step-by-step rules. And there's nothing wrong with that. Math is incredibly important. It makes the world go round. But there's different ways to solve problems, right? We don't always have a step-by-step way to get to something. Sometimes you have to be creative when you're figuring out how to solve those problems. So, for our next few art projects, that's what it's all about. It's all about your creativity. You're going to be coming up with a whole lot of stuff completely out of your brain. There's going to be kind of an overall topic. There's going to be 3 individual projects, but they're all going to be about the same thing. Now that thing that you're going to come up with, you're going to come up with your own place. So when I say place, think of like a country, a state, a kingdom, something like that. Your own location on Earth. Or maybe not even on Earth, but we'll get into that in a little bit. For the first thing that we're going to do with this big long 3-week project, in order to know more about your place and where it is and what kind of a place that is, you're going to draw a map. So maps are super important, right? If we didn't have maps, we wouldn't know what countries and cities and states looked like. We wouldn't know how to get from one place to another. We watched a video, hopefully you watched a video up above this, that talked about how people make globes by hand. Now, a long time ago, before we had computers and satellites and things, that's how all maps were made. People had to draw them, they had to paint them. In order to collect the information to put on that map, they had to go out with really special tools and spend years figuring out, exactly what the coastline of a country looked like, where the ocean meets the land. So it took a really, really long time. And even though it took a really, really long time, they didn't have like a ton of information. It might be just the outline of a country, the outline of an island, the outline of a state. Now, as time has gone on, and especially with the help of like satellites and computers, the information on those maps has gotten better and better. When I was your age, which is a thing that old people say to young people, if we wanted to go somewhere, we had to use this. We had to get out an actual map and say, all right, I'm right here, but I want to be right there. And now I know I need to take these roads to get there. Well, now it's a whole lot easier, right? You'll pull out this thing and you say, hey Siri, give me directions to Lexington, Kentucky.
Getting directions to Lexington.
And sure enough, she's going to tell me every single right turn, left turn direction I need to go to get there. So maps are still super important. They just work in a little bit different sort of a way. When we talk about maps, we're talking about information, right? It's a visual representation of information. And different sizes of map or different scales of maps have different amounts of information. So let's look at a few different scales. Now, when I'm talking about a map's scale, that's how big it is geographically, how large of a size of the planet I'm looking at. So if we start way out, we would see something like this. This would be the entire planet, mostly, kind of, sort of. Now, this doesn't give you a good idea of how to get from your house to Strode Station, does it? No. So to get closer, to get more information that's more relevant to what you need to know, we need to kind of zoom in. So if we start here, kind of the next scale of a map would be like a country scale. Now this tells us a lot more information than the whole world view did. This tells us what states are where. This might show us things like rivers and lakes, and even if this was like a road atlas, we might see interstates and things like that. But still, again, if your goal is to get from your house to school, this isn't going to be very helpful. We zoom in a little bit more, and we get more detail. Now this would be just a state map. This would be just Kentucky. Now, again, might not be super helpful if you're trying to get from your house to school. We would need to go even closer and get like just a city map. But this one's going to be a lot more useful to you if you're trying to get to like Lexington. So different kinds of maps, different scales of maps have different information. There's all kinds of fictional maps, not real maps, in our world as well. For a long time, authors would, that some still do, include maps in their books if it was kind of a world that they had created. This would be a map of Neverland from Peter Pan. And then one way that I'm sure a lot of you guys use fictional maps today is in a video game. Most of you probably know what this is from. It tells you how to get around. So it's still serving that same purpose of how do I get from one place to another, except it's not in the real world. Just like the ones that we would find for books, especially if it's a book that doesn't have pictures, it'll help you be able to visualize, well, if the main character started in these mountains and then went to this ocean, they had to travel through this forest to get there. All right, so that's a whole lot, just kind of some basics about maps, why we have them, why we use them, things like that. They're very important. We're going to look at two more things now, and then you're going to get started coming up with your own ideas. The first thing we're going to look at, we're just going to talk about some terms, some basic things that we usually see on a lot of maps, whether it's real or fictional or whatever. And some of these things, not all of them, but some of them, I'm going to want you to include in the map of your place. So let's look at that first. All right, so here we have an example of a map. This is, of course, a made-up map. If there was a place with giant spiders and sea monsters and volcanoes, I don't know that many people would want to go there. There's a lot of information on this map about how to read a map and what certain things on a map are called. I'll put this example up on the website with the lesson for you guys to look at if you're interested in all these definitions. But we're real fast just going to talk about a couple of them, the things that I said I would like you to include on yours. The first one being the title. We need to know what it's called. This can have something to do with the theme of the place you have invented. They've called this one Maplandia because they're using it as an example to talk about maps. So that makes sense. But it doesn't necessarily have to. Let's say you created a kingdom that is controlled entirely by cats and you wanted to call it Catlandia or Catistan. That's fine. But you don't have to. So that's an option. But we do need to know what your place is called. So the next thing we will talk about is this thing down here. Now, it is called a compass rose. It's called a compass rose because a long time ago when artists were making maps, they would make these look very fancy, and people used to think that the points of the compass could end up looking floral, could end up looking like a flower, like a rose. So this thing's important on a map because if we don't know which direction we need to be looking at it in, we don't know which direction up, down, side to side are, then we could get lost pretty easy. The last important thing that I want you guys to add is this part down here called a legend. Now, you can also call this a key. On the example that I made, I called it a key. They're pretty much the same thing for what we're doing. Now, this would be where you would explain any of the symbols on your map that might not make sense. If you think about a map like we talked about on the scale of an entire state, then you wouldn't really have the room to draw the outline of each individual town. So you would just come up with some symbol that you would use for a town, and you would need to explain it in that legend or key. If you look on this one, they've gotten pretty in depth. They've explained what the forests are, what the mountains are. On mine, I didn't explain that much in depth because I felt like people that were looking at it could tell what a mountain was. But things like roads and rivers and stuff like that, I did explain in my key or legend, whichever one you want to call it. Like I said, I'll put this example up on the lesson website for you to look at if you're interested in understanding any of the other things that this example shows us. All right, so hopefully that'll give you kind of an idea of some of the things we want to include in our map. So now we're going to go ahead and look at the example that I made. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that I included, some of the things that we would see on a real map that I added in my completely made up map. Some of the symbols I used for like the legend, the key, that part. Some of the decisions I made that would help show like what kind of environment my place is, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and look at that example. Here is the example that I came up with for my place that I'll be using throughout all these projects. We're using a place. Hopefully, just by looking at a few things, you can maybe tell some stuff about my place. You can tell by some of the symbols that were used for like cities, towns, villages, maybe what time period in history this is from. I don't know that we would see something that looked like a castle on a map that was supposed to be something more modern. So this would probably be, Middle Ages kind of time period. I have included the things that I wanted you to include. So I've got my title. The name of my kingdom, we'll call it, is Holidania, which is not very creative. Hopefully you're more creative than me, because as you can tell, I just sort of turned my last name into something that sounded like it might be a place. I also included my nice little compass rose down here, which you can't see all of because part of the west got cut off in the picture. My apologies. And over on the far side, I have my key, my map key. So remember, that's the thing that I explained the symbols that I felt might not make a ton of sense just by looking at the map. So I chose things like rivers, roads, bridges, villages, and towns. Those all seemed like important things to me, important things that a person could maybe get confused if we didn't explain them very well, if we didn't color code them. If these were all made out of black lines, it might be somewhat confusing to tell a difference between the road and the river and things like that. So just looking at my map, we said that we can tell maybe what time period it's from. We can tell that there's a pretty big difference in what kind of environment we see. There's some tropical areas where we see some palm trees down by the beach. There's some forest and mountain areas, which We can see the kind of trees, kind of pine tree shapes that we would see in a colder climate up near the mountains. If you look over near the left, the west side of Holodania, where there's a couple lines with some yellow, that's supposed to represent like a farm field. When you look at a field on a farm that's been planted, and you see those rows. Then, of course, we've got a big lake with some villages by it down in kind of the southeast part of Holodania. So, like I said, you can choose to make your key or your legend as detailed as you want. I chose to kind of go with some of the basics and leave my map to do some of the explaining for me. All right. So hopefully at this point you've started coming up with some of your own ideas. Since you've got a whole week to work on this first map project, I would say take your time. Maybe even start by taking a little while just with a pencil and a piece of paper writing down some ideas before you even start trying to draw it. What kind of a place? What size? What scale are you talking about? Is it a whole country? Is it just one state? Is it just one like little kingdom kind of area? What kind of environment? Is it in the mountains? Is it on an island? Is it in the desert? These are all things that if you think about before you get started, it'll make the drawing process that much easier once you get there. So the 4 important things that I would like to see on your map. I would like to see the title. I would like to see the name of the place somewhere. I would like to see a legend, a key, whichever one of those you want to call it, and symbols. So symbols that you use on your map, I want you to explain. I would like to see that compass rose thing of some sort. And I guess I should have just said 3 things, because those are the 3 that I want. So forget that I said 4. So 3 things: a title, legend with symbols, and your compass rose showing us what direction. Those are the important things. Any other details you want to add, that's up to you. All right, my friends, I cannot wait to start seeing some of the awesome creative places you're going to invent. Remember, we're going to do a couple things with this. So this is just the first project that's going to have to do with this place that you're coming up with, which again, might be a good idea to write some things down first. What sort of people live there? Are there people that live there? Maybe it's a whole country run by cats. I don't know. You're the creative ones. You can figure this out on your own. All right, my friends. Looking forward to seeing your artwork. Hope you are doing well. See you later. Bye-bye.